Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session. We have Steve with us with Checkmarx today, and this is a webinar where we will be discussing how Web2 to Web3 transition has happened and how our enterprise AppSec has evolved so far. It's a great pleasure to have you, Steve, today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of the webinar.
Yeah. Okay, Steve, would be actually great to hear from you what you do at Checkmarks and reason why we're speaking today, and how has your experience been so far being in the industry for so long?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Boone. I'm a director of product marketing at Checkmarx, also technical evangelist. Been in the AppSec space now a little over 8 years, and have been really, focused on bringing products to market that focus around both continuous integration, continuous delivery, and AppSec. So, really playing in that whole DevSecOps space, and it's been really fun to see not only the technologies advance, but the really how we think about DevSecOps and AppSec as a whole start to evolve and mature. And I think that's kind of the great topic we have today is that kind of yet again another step in that evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you put it very right. I think from the reactive testing to integrated CI/CD security and even policy-driven enforcement, we've gone far from that journey, and that's where I think a lot of the software paradigm has also shifted and changed, and we've seen that this I mean, a lot of AppSec teams, enterprise AppSec teams, are also now embracing traditional models with the support of an industry like Web3 and its own decentralized system. So, in this webinar today, Steve will help us understand a bit more about how AppSec has evolved from Web2 to Web3, and we'll talk about where legacy security models also break down. We'll highlight a little bit about our partnership together, recent partnership where we've decided to extend each other's capabilities to make sure that enterprise grade AppSec is also integrated and speaks in a way with the blockchain environments as well. We'll end the session with a short technical demo, and then if there are any questions from the audience, we'll take it live. Steve will help us answer your queries. Steve, up to you. I'll just let you take the stage over.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you guys again for your time today. We know you got your time is important. And so we're appreciative of you coming and spending it with us and learning a little bit about the Checkmarx and CredShields partnership. So today's talk, as I mentioned, is really about evolution, right? AppSec has been evolving now for years, and decentralized code simply exposes, in a lot of ways, the next gap that we need to address. So if you're responsible for AppSec, if you're responsible for governance or anything around developer workflows, this story should feel familiar. Even if the idea of Web3 in AppSec is new to you, hopefully you'll understand the importance and come away with some great ideas around next steps to continue securing your organization and your applications. So first thing I want to talk about really is, when we thought about AppSec 10 plus years ago, we designed models for the way that we delivered code, right? And most AppSec programs were built for a very reasonable world. When we think back on it, most applications were centralized. The code that we were scanning and driving our applications with was largely written by humans and open source, right? There was all sorts of open source components that we're obviously leveraging as well. And for the most part, releases were fairly predictable. If you were maybe running more monolithic applications, you knew that was coming in a monthly time frame. If you were doing more sophisticated DevOps, maybe you were capable of delivering daily into your production environments. And so when we thought about AppSec, security made sense to think of it logically as gates, right? And we could do these security checks at pull requests, and we would do it at builds. And ideally, we would be doing it again before we deployed our applications. And to be clear, right, this model worked. It wasn't necessarily naive or wrong. It was just very much aligned to how software was built at the time. And if you think about it, this model worked because the software behaved predictably, right? We knew exactly what to expect. The reality is, though, right, the world's changing fast. It always is. And today, when we think about how applications are built, and probably even more specifically, right, how code is being developed, it's continuously delivered, right? Not only delivered, but committed and refactored. And AI has had a huge part in this, right? AI in assisting or generating large portions of developers' code. And with that, if you think about even the environments where we're running these applications, in a lot of ways, they're becoming more fragmented. So the key shift really is this. Security can no longer act as a single moment in time, right? It has to operate just as continuously as our delivery practices. A lot of times we'll hear people say, we're only as strong as our weakest link. And this holds up when we think about AppSec as well. For all the money that organizations are investing in efficiency, right? We're adopting things like AI because we want to move more quickly and deliver software more efficiently. That's only going to be able to move as fast as our AppSec operations allow us to move to our end goals, right? So it has to operate continuously, and it has to, honestly, it's got to flow inside development. And that's some of the things we'll talk about today. So the good news is this evolution was already underway really way before Web3 entered the picture. And AppSec's already had to evolve, to really help move this along. So when we think about, what is it that's needed in terms of a holistic AppSec approach, it's important to think about, well, what do people need in the organization, right? AppSec affects a lot of different individuals, from the developers all the way up to the CISOs. And it's important when we think about, regardless of the type of applications we're building, the process needs to evolve not only to get us from development to production, but to also support the needs of these individuals, right? So from a developer perspective, now when we talk about, if you want to have a highly successful AppSec program, it's got to be something developers are going to latch onto, right? So that means that they're going to be able to stay within their workflow. And specifically meaning we can avoid context switching, having to go from one security tool to another security tool, having to jump in from maybe one IDE over into a different code base. You want all of that in a single area where developers can access their code, access security findings, and be able to operate in a continuous fashion. And for our AppSec leaders, right, they're largely responsible for being able to understand if risk is real. And so it doesn't help if we hand over thousands of vulnerabilities, right? We need to be able to provide clarity. What vulnerabilities should we focus on, and when should we focus on them, and how can we prioritize that to make sure that both AppSec and developers know if you have only 15 minutes a day to work on something, these are the areas that you should focus on. Now, for our engineering leaders, folks actually driving development, probably the key aspect for them is striking some sort of balance, right? There's a lot of pressure to be able to deliver quickly. There's an equal amount of pressure to make sure that that code is secure and that they can establish and continue trust with their customer base. So they have to find a security process that's going to be able to fit naturally into the processes and flows that they've already established for their teams. And then lastly, when we think about leadership all the way up to the CISO level, right, it's about a focus on reducing exposure and making sure that we can prove our security outcomes. At the end of the day, we want to be able to show clients, hey, we've pushed this software to these locations, we've addressed these different vulnerabilities, and here's the results to show that we are more secure than we were previously. So all of that plays, a very important role in our delivery process. And so when we think about what mature AppSec teams have already solved, right, the good news is the hardest part of this has already been done for a lot of organizations and for a lot of thought leadership aspects to AppSec. Now, what's important here is that AppSec teams didn't stand still, right? Mature programs already have been adapted. The idea of shift left scanning and using CI/CD is very common. Now you're starting to see the push of IDE native feedback for developers, right? So as a developer in my IDE, I'm not only seeing my code and maybe some vulnerability findings, I'm also seeing things like remediation guidance. Could be seeing things like prioritized list of vulnerabilities for me to focus on. And these are, again, these aren't future goals. These are, really what I would consider table stakes for modern AppSec, right? So all of this to kind of bring us to the main question, if AppSec has already evolved, kind of where does it fall short? And I want to take a minute and kind of discuss a little bit about what, I think great AppSec looks like within organizations today, right? And we talk about some kind of key words here when we try to describe efficient AppSec, right? On one hand, it needs to be deep. I like to think about AppSec is kind of a patchwork quilt, right? You need to focus on all aspects of the different patterns of the quilt, right? You got to think about not only your code, but your infrastructure. You got to think about your open source. You got to think about your cloud security. All of that plays a part into how we look at application security as a whole. The other areas is that we've got to be able to go wide, right? We need to be able not just to be able to scan the code, but also how that code communicates, its APIs, its containers. And it needs to be in the background, right? The thing that we need less of is noise, right? Developers want to be able to be informed when there is a critical vulnerability. They want to be informed on how to fix it, but they don't need 30 different emails telling them that a scans ran and that there is new vulnerabilities that are found. That often becomes ignored after a while. And then it's important that the solutions we bring are also fast and that they're scalable, right? At the end of the day, if we can't scale this across, hundreds of applications, this isn't something that's going to be adopted at the enterprise level. Great. So next, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about our offering Checkmarx One. We'll see a little bit later the integration with CredShields and how it ties into Checkmarx One. Checkmarx One is our enterprise AppSec platform that really covers everything from code to cloud. And you can see within this diagram here that we have solutions for not only how you can go and scan your code, but also your supply chain. And we bring this all up with our new family and protective AI-powered agentic agents. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. But essentially a system of agents that are designed for those different personas that we talked about, the developers, the AppSec engineers, the CISOs, to be able to understand the data better, to be able to remediate vulnerabilities more quickly, and to triage as those findings are found. So when I like to think about kind of discussing this, is think about where it fits into your organization or how it might, snap into existing tools and processes you have. At the base of what we're bringing and delivering for our customers are those core engines, right? There are the SAST and DAST capabilities of being able to both dynamically and statically analyze your code, right? But also looking at that infrastructure and those APIs. Another key aspect that we talk about often is open source, but in parallel to that is the worry around malicious packages. And the Checkmarx One platform will actually help you scan for all of these different types of vulnerabilities with a single click. That's how we got the name Checkmarx One. One click for all of these various engines. And as I mentioned, we also have our AppSec agents that sit on top of that. Again, these are our developer assist agents, our policy agents, which are triage and remediation based, and our insights agents. Just last year, we introduced our ASPM capabilities. Again, this is around data aggregation and correlation to be able to help understand and dedupe findings across all of our engines and prioritize those for our developers. And then the great part about all of this is that it's tied into a single platform. And so that platform is going to allow you one place to manage your integrations, one place to get all of your security results across those engines, and one place to manage security access. So you're not having to constantly go through multiple tools and maintain users and credentials across the organization as well. All right. Just a couple of little stats I'd like to share with you guys. It's something we're incredibly proud of and excited to work with the CredShields audience as well and welcome into our family. Is just the size of which we have been able to grow this platform. To date, we're over 1,000 customers. We're scanning over 900 billion lines of code monthly. That is just an incredible amount when you stop to think about it. Totaling over 4 million scans, right? And my favorite part about it is when we look at the number of container images and the number of open source packages, those continue to grow year over year, which is exciting to see from an adoption perspective. So a lot of value here that you can get and scale and know you can grow confidently. And the great part about this is the industry's taken notice, right? For the last 7 years now, we've been represented by Gartner as a top SaaS application within the market. We've just got a lot of awards this last year in 2025 from the IDC and from Forrester around some of our ASPM offerings as well, which is exciting. And so it brings us really to this idea of having to ask ourselves, well, Steve, if we've got all this great capability in AppSec today, what is our missing piece, right? Why are we here? What's the new challenge? And this is really where, the story of decentralized code comes into play, right? When we start talking about smart contracts, these isn't just another service or framework. There are clear differences that really break down the current approach that we have, right? For instance, once we deploy the smart contracts, they're immutable, right? And this is important to understand because the business logic that we're going to have is going to execute on that chain. And the code is really directly responsible in a lot of ways for the assets and value associated with them. And I think probably the other challenge here, right, is there's no centralized operator who's going to be able to step in after the fact. So, it's not that Web3 introduces new bugs, but I firmly believe that it changes the consequences of finding these vulnerabilities, and it emphasizes how we need to find them earlier in the development process. So I want to talk a little bit about why legacy security models don't map cleanly and some of the challenges that we have that Web3 brings in, right? Now, I think when we think about, earlier we talked about those kind of traditional AppSec models, and I think when we think about them, they assume a handful of things, right? One is that vulnerabilities are patchable, and the kind of idea of remediation is iterative. And obviously there's controls that exist after deployment to allow that. But smart contracts, honestly, they break those assumptions. The exploits are often economic or logic-based, and the execution is largely deterministic and not reversible. So there's really no runtime safety net. So I think in many ways, this problem presents itself as a coverage and a governance gap, right? So any organization, especially working with Web3, has to take this seriously and understand, well, how am I going to account for these types of risks and vulnerability? And what is its overall impact to my business and my AppSec footprint? Right. So most AppSec programs are designed around this idea that defects are patchable and recoverable. And that's really when we get down to the bottom of it. We have to be able to change that assumption. When we start working in the Web3 world, that idea goes out the window really quick. And so we got to kind of come to what I call our enterprise reality check, right? And this is where, when we think about kind of the four main things that we want to take away from this, and that, hopefully you get from the Checkmarx perspective, is that when it comes to Web3 risk, the AppSec teams are still responsible for this risk, right? They still need a way to work through it and find their solutions. And from an enterprise perspective, CISOs and developers, they're not going to manage parallel security stacks. So we have to find a way, again, to consolidate, to keep people in their flow, and to give them a sense, kind of that single unified pane of glass where they can start to look for their results, right? So whatever Web3 security looks like, it has to plug and play into enterprise AppSec controls. It cannot live beside it. And honestly, that's exactly why this partnership exists today, right? Checkmarx continues to orchestrate application security, tying into your CI/CD pipelines, providing you that in IDE experience, and adapting to your organization's policy and governance needs while providing the reporting at scale. And CredShields, as we'll see today, continues to bring deep smart contract enterprise where traditional coverage stops, right? And I think that's one of the beauties of having CredShields as a partner with Checkmarx, is we can now leverage the technology that they have and bring that to our landscape of customers, many of which are adopting Web3 technologies as well. So together, this extends not only AppSec into Web3, but it does it so without fragmenting workflows, visibility, or ownership. So Shreya, thank you so much. I think I'll hand it back over to you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk today. Maybe you can share a little bit with us about the CredShield side of the story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. That was really insightful. I guess a lot of people watching this right now must have gotten an insight about how the landscape is changing, and it's just a matter of time, I guess. Everybody, even in the AppSec industry, starts to take account of decentralization and how they can also kind of evolve with the changing landscape. I will just add a bit more from where we kind of stopped. So I think you've already told about the partnership. So yeah, we were actually really glad that we were able to help a lot of teams, and we share kind of same vision, both CredShields and the Checkmarx team. We do not want to kind of replace the existing enterprise AppSec flows, but actually extend them into decentralized systems. And both of us come with the same kind of experiences. Checkmarks brings a very strong understanding of developer workflows at scale, and we bring a deep expertise in exploit patterns, protocol level risks, etc. I would just now quickly take our audience through the uh, a demo of how this works. If you have to actually, I mean, this demo is how we'll show smart contract security fit naturally into your existing AppSec pipeline. It is not a separate process. It's just an extension of the CI/CD. I'll just quickly play the demo here. So this is the checkmarks interface. You go on new, you create an application here, and once you do that, you name the application, you do all of the parameters, you fill the form. You just created a test application, and here after this you create like a project inside of the application. Yeah, you create a project here, you name a test.
Yeah, and this is great too because you can have multiple projects kind of associated under that application. So if you've got multiple components, this is a great way to stack them.
Then you go back to solidity scan, is where you can connect check marks and your project and the application that you just created. You select the region, then you go back to check marks, you select the API keys. It's basically the process of how you connect check marks to solidity scan. Got connected. And go back to the application that you just connected, and it will show up here as well. And then you link your GitHub. So this setting kind of helps you connect your account, and this will enable any real time vulnerabilities that come in.
It's awesome.
Now this is just scanning the repository you just uploaded. There you go. Here is the result of few risks, and it is given a risk score of the repository and the contract. And it also suggests you how you can work around the remediation of it as well. And now there's a score, and there are also parameters that you can choose from to see.
I think it's really great how you can see even within this demo, a couple of key things. One, as a developer, again, you're staying in that flow, right? You're not having to pull yourself out. All of the data is now flowing directly into one place. You've got that bi-directional communication as well. So everything that we're seeing from a risk and remediation suggestion that we would normally see on the CredShield side is now being pulled directly in onto the platform. And I think that's such a key piece for being able to scale this and have, this type of extremely important information alongside your other sets of security information. Because when you start thinking about prioritization and what to actually go fix, absolutely you need to be able to take Web3 into account for that. And this is a fantastic solution to be able to go and do that.
Right. Okay, that's it for the demo. If there are any questions from the audience, this is time that we take them up. Before I actually go into the audience questions, Steve, one question I would like to ask you uh, is what is like the biggest misconception you feel enterprises have when they are asked to approach blockchain security?
Boy, that's a good one. I think for me, I think they don't quite understand, how disruptive it can be. And I think, the number one challenge that we see people having is they've spent years, building an AppSec program, working to get developers engaged in AppSec. And so when they start to move out into blockchain, all of a sudden we start seeing them kind of drift from the normal well-prepared processes, and they start to build a parallel stream of security specifically to address Web3. And the processes that it follows, the gates that it follows, the feedback loop to the developers is largely different, right? And that becomes problematic because now within your organization, you've got two different motions for handling vulnerabilities, for handling remediation. You've got two different ways that you're trying to track it, from things like, mean time to remediation. That is a clear KPI that we work with companies to understand, how mature is your organization. And we'll see that now they're tracking two different types of MTTR. They're tracking their traditional, what we'll call Web2 applications, and they're also tracking their Web3, and they're doing it separately. And so, part of what we're always working with is that if you want to get that complete picture, you really need to be bringing these things together. Otherwise, you don't have a full understanding of where that application is vulnerable and the risk that it presents to the business. So, far and wide, and you ask, like, that's probably the biggest misconception, the biggest challenge that we have running in there is that people think, well, different challenges, different technologies, we'll give them and treat them with different processes. And that really shouldn't be the case. Don't throw away that existing investment. Don't throw away that investment that you have in your own tooling, right? All of this can be integrated with the existing tools you have in place. And all of the policies and gating that you've put in place shouldn't have to be reworked just because simply now you want to do work that's on chain. So hopefully, what people come away with here today is an understanding that they can do this with their own organization and make this scale.
Absolutely. We've got a follow-up question, I think, from the first question from somebody in the audience. They're asking if you would want to recommend anything for existing AppSec teams to upskill for Web3 on blockchain.
Goodness, I think that's important. I think at the end of the day, developer education is important, right? I think one of the focuses that we always have, regardless of the type of applications we're developing, is to educate, right? And so it's one thing to teach people about the risks. It's another thing to teach people how to prevent them and how to remediate them. So there's a number of good solutions out there to learn about, I would say smart or secure coding. From the Checkmarx perspective, we offer a solution called code bashing, which teaches developers all sorts of different ways to identify, prevent, and remediate common vulnerabilities. Specifically, when it comes to Web3, I would encourage you to work with folks at CredShields. They've proven, I think, time and time again, that they understand the risks in this area and can be that kind of trusted advisor when it comes to helping your organizations take those next steps, understanding how to do it correctly, how to scale it, and probably more importantly, what to look for and how to fix those findings once you get it in place.
That's super helpful. Now, another question, Steve, which is what type of vulnerabilities are commonly missed when teams rely only on legacy AppSec tooling? Is one of the questions asked by the audience.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? I think that depending on your type of, again, how we think about legacy tooling, um, I mentioned earlier that I think of AppSec as kind of like a patchwork quilt, right? And so when we talk with organizations, there are different levels of maturity. And if you're wondering where you fall on that level of maturity, one of the things we offer at Checkmarx is an evaluation. We call it APMA, but that's Application Security Posture Management, or I'm sorry, AppSec Maturity Assessment Model. And what we'll do is we'll actually look at the different tools that you have in place, how your organization is doing AppSec today, and then compare that to organizations that are in your same verticals, right? So if you're in healthcare, we'll show you how other healthcare companies stack up. If you're in financials, we'll show you how other financials stack up. Now, why I get into this is, a lot of customers that are early in their AppSec journey might only be doing something like SAST. That used to be the core basis, is that all I care about is scanning my proprietary code. However, that's rapidly changed over the last 4 years. Now when we think about what is the essentials, what are the things that you need to have the bare minimum of good AppSec? It's SAST, it's SCA, so that you're scanning your open source and finding those vulnerabilities, and it's infrastructure as code, right? Today, applications are well over 80% open source. So you have to have a way of knowing what risks you're bringing into your organization. And alternatively, right, when we're deploying applications to the cloud, we got to know about our risks, about the infrastructure, and making sure that it's just as secure as the app. So as we progress in maturity, we cover more breadth of the types of vulnerabilities that we might traditionally miss when we think about it as legacy. To be completely covered, you also got to think about, again, your containers. You got to think about your APIs. You got to think about, not only that, you got to think about your AI generated code. Now you have to even start thinking about large language models. All of this continues to expand. And when you get into Web3, you can come into a whole nother specific area of vulnerabilities that can be overlooked and missed. All because you just didn't have the right types of engines scanning and looking for them. So I think to really protect yourself, you got to think about the types of technologies you have and making sure that you have some ability, from an auditing and compliance perspective to be able to say, yes, we looked at this code and here's what we found. And more importantly, here's how we responded to it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you, Steve, for answering questions from the audience. If there are any more questions, you can actually drop on the post. You can actually DM anybody from CredShields or even Steve on LinkedIn if you want to ask anything that we discussed from the webinar today. I would just take time to wrap what we kind of spoke about today, and it is that I think the security right now governs value movement. It governs trust guarantees and also reversible execution. The evolution that we discussed today is also about continuity. It is extending proven AppSec intelligence into decentralized systems without fragmenting or disrupting workflows. I would like to extend sincere thanks to Steve for taking the time for putting this together, and taking the time to educate the audience that is from CredShields, which is the Web3 audience, but we've also worked a lot in the traditional systems. So if anybody from there is watching this, you already know that Checkmarx has been working very closely with us to make sure that this vision is kind of is adopted a lot more, and we openly talk about this bridge between both the industries and take this forward. Steve, any last words that you might want to put in?
No, just want to thank our friends at CredShields and our audience for, again, taking some time out with us today and learning a little bit about kind of the evolution to Web3. And as Shreya said, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody. We will be sharing the recording on other social media channels as well. And there are a lot of more resources that we've been working on. We just released the State of 2025 Security Report last week. That is available on our website. You can go follow Checkmarks and kind of follow them on socials to be updated on what updates the team shares. And again, thank you so much for watching, and whoever's listening the recording later, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.